Hello, and welcome to episode 101 of Prose. This week, experience Notre-Dame through a millennia-old resident, and make a mediocre deal with the devil. I certainly hope this episode finds you well amid the various social distancing and quarantines in place right now. If you're new to the show, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to our backlog of 100 episodes. That might help stave some of the boredom off as we all continue to weather this thing together. Please do go follow the show on social media under @ProsePodcast across all platforms. If you are enjoying the show, please click the 5-star review button on whatever podcast app is your favorite. It really does help out a lot. For easiest access to the show, subscribe using Apple Podcast, Google Play, Stitcher, whatever you like. Do share the show with friends and family if you're enjoying it as well. Lastly, but assuredly not leastly, check out the Prose Patreon page at patreon.com/ProsePodcast and consider supporting the show there. Not only will I send loads of gratitude your way, I'll also send you some swag. Thanks for listening. Let's get to the tale, shall we? This week, we have Farewell to Home, and all this, and for what? Enjoy! Farewell to Home, an original short story by Jared I. McGee.
At roughly 10 minutes to the 7th evening hour on April 15th, 2019, the humans finally accomplished something they had been unsuccessful at accomplishing for 674 years. They caused me to leave my home. Since the 14th century, pretty much since Cathédrale Notre-Dame de Paris, better known to the Anglophilic world as Notre-Dame Cathedral, I have lived and worked and hunted and haunted from the spires of that great church. Even from the beginnings of my taking roost amid those towers reaching for heaven, rumors quickly circulated about the malevolent gargoyle that stalked Paris by night. Yeah. Somehow, I was also simultaneously deemed a protector of the great house of worship, held accountable for all the deaths and disappearances, while called on to protect the cathedral and her city. The builders going so far as to mock up stone versions of what they thought I might look like and placing them around the building. Humans can come up with the oddest cognitive dissonances that can live oddly harmoniously in their mortal minds. From the tops of Notre Dame, I watched the world for centuries. If one actually wants something beautiful, one must cling to it, protect it. I had protected this island since long before the Romans and the Christians took over. In those days, there were no spires, just wasted meat sacrifices to an ever-changing pantheon of pagan gods of the region, then Jupiter. I must admit, though, the meat wasn't wasted on me. I fear I probably perpetuated these beliefs by pilfering and consuming a great many of those sacrificial offerings. It wasn't until 1374 years ago that humans began to shift their focus to the Christian God. At first, I was hesitant, particularly when the easy meat source disappeared with the disappearance of blood and flesh sacrifices. However, as the spires began to rise, I realized the vantage point the humans were building for me. Over the course of over 2 centuries, I watched and waited and hunted around the Isle, seeing my new imposing home being raised above the land. I thought the humans would burn and wash away anything resembling true freedom. But I was wrong. With those rising walls and towers, I could see my domain for miles to come, and without any lost energy to soar into the stratosphere. And when the humans added the great organ and 9 bells and began to sing to their god, what an exhalation of angels! What glory! Even I began to consider conversion, though I've seen hundreds of gods and goddesses rise and fall over the millennia. How Guillaume Mongo played the organ, sending music into the heavens for the first time so long ago. How my 9 friends have comforted me over the centuries. My dear Jean-Marie, Maurice, Benoît-Joseph, Etienne, Marcel, Denis, Anne, Geneviève, Gabrielle, et Bourdon-Marie. Sounds were exultant, but so were sights. The grand oculus that the French built outshone anything their Roman forebears were able to craft, the rose light casting anything in its path in such a hue as to make it seem living and breathing and warm. I should not have allowed myself to rest so comfortably, though. I must confess that I began to love the humans in my own way, though they would probably not recognize it as love. With the advent of the cathedral, I stopped hunting their young and their weak. I stuck only to wild game. I even began to get the notion that I should protect the beasts, albeit a couple hundred years after the final spires were raised. Never let anyone say that a comfortable home, a comfortable life, does not soften one's affect. The humans allowed non-believers in to tour and bring up an unholy clamor in the long sacred space. Those slovenly beasts trundled their way through, disrespecting the humans' own god and sullying my rest, my solace, and my home. If I had been the strength I was millennia ago, or if I had a rookery or even a mate or another bull that might join with me to come down upon these invaders, the fire never would have taken my home. No knight or warrior or magician or king or marvel of modern weaponry or science caused me to take flight. No. A peasant's errant cigarette, tossed too closely to something flammable, was the only incendiary needed to cause the mighty structure to catch flame. Headlines of larmes, tears, and catastrophe, disaster were called from the streets. Wailing and lamentations rose up akin to those that came alongside Caesar and Charlemagne and Hitler. My stony heart did not weep for them, though. I have no love of the humans. The symbol of their own city, their own country, their own culture was taken down by their own stupidity and lack of profundity and respect toward their sacred spaces. The flames actually began in the evening, when the last of the paying humans left off gawking at my home as if it was some commonplace sideshow. I know this because I went out to hunt as the sun was beginning to set. In that dimming light, most take me for a bird or a bat or anything but what I am. Had I been there, I might have been able to combat those initial flames that rose as the sun did fall. I returned from my hunt sated with bovine flesh only to find the grand spire falling down as the night took hold. And the night threatens to keep hold. Initially, the humans swore fealty to their traditions and their god, all far and wide swearing to rebuild my island nesting ground as soon as they could. However, humans are short-sighted and short-lived. Wars and blight and traditional tragedies came in waves, all predicated and initiated by the humans themselves, and the Hall of Our Lady was forgotten. Progress inches forward, but I do not trust the humans not to lose heart or focus. They are not made of the stuff they once were so very long ago. So, I have said farewell to home on the isle and gone abroad into the countryside, seeking quiet and anywhere where the stink of humanity's decay cannot reach me. Though I am fearful that such a place was long ago lost to creation.
Thank you for listening to Farewell to Home, a short story by me, Jared I. McGee. Please stick around for the second story this week, wherein you'll make a mediocre deal with the devil. Let's continue on to the next tale, shall we? All This, and For What? An original short story by Jared I. McGee. As with all stories involving the rogue, my tale of Mephistopheles begins with an ill-considered bargain. Admittedly, my tale is quite a bit less dramatic than that of the oft-lauded Faust, but, to me, it is no less harrowing or interesting. Then again, I am the protagonist of my own tale and therefore rather biased. There is no real lead-up to the offer, really. I am just about as mediocre as they come, so any retelling of the events leading up to my literal deal with the devil will be necessarily mediocre. For the first 5 years of adulthood, I worked piecemeal, hourly wage jobs. I had a lot of fun, maybe even more than my fair share, at least among the hypocritical zealots of my dear home community that shall remain nameless. So financial peace was not mine, but personal freedom soared. That personal freedom not being focused on too terribly much other than getting laid and having a good time. Still, the statement stands. I had a lot of fun. My mid-20s gave way to brighter futures, at least on the surface. I shone through my probable mediocrity and had titles like Wunderkind and Professor and Published Author and Genius thrown about. In reality, I learned how to play a rigged system to my advantage. Maybe that is a form of intelligence to itself, but the one thing I do know is that I was never, by any stretch of anyone's imagination, a special child, intellectual sage, readable writer, or above par mind. It just wasn't so. During this time of undue praise, I continued my days in sports of choice. Rutting and running to my heart's content, living life carpeing every diem, as best my short-sightedness knew how. Like many would-be greats, Cupid knocked me down a time or two amid my wanderings, and those batterings led to an increase in cynicism and loathing for the world. It also chipped away at the false veneer of surety and self-love that I had wrapped around myself for the better part of a decade. So when 30 came upon me like a lion, 29-year-old me chose to do what any rational man in my position would. I found a girl 10 years younger than me, far too pretty for me, far too dumb for me, and I fell in love with her with every atom of my flagging being. That goddamned Cupid, you know? I didn't mean to do it. It just happened, as these things do. Dreams of a normal life, of working meaningless jobs that I was good at and therefore praised for, of marrying in front of crowds of my dwindling family and friends, of fathering children whom I'd love but who would see the all but squelched light of joie de vivre in my eyes, of growing old with someone until one of our lives was extinguished after life thought to be well lived. Those dreams consumed me. Greatness took a back burner to immediacy and normalcy. I stopped aiming for the stars and began only aiming for the treetops. And somewhere amid the lowering of my sights, my beloved decided that this normal life, this normal job, this now normal man just wasn't enough for her. She chose to hop and skip and sprint to the nearest beds, yes, beds plural, of men in our little community of normal lifers, grunting and sweating along to the rhythms of greater mediocrity. Yes, but greater ignorance as well. So, there with those men, she could once again feel like a queen, because indeed she reigned over them and their nothingness of a world. Beers on Friday, sports on Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 5 Monday to the next set of beers on Friday. These men didn't hope to live beyond the mortal coil. As long as she kept herself looking sexy for their Instagram posts together, these captains of the commonplace would be keenly happy to lavish her and worship her. In the end, she went not just for one of those captains, no, but the highest ranking general of the generic. In all that he is in his wan existence, I am a god come to life. In all that I strove to be in that arc of love, allowing my spark to snuff, I deserved to be stripped of my godhood, and therefore stripped of my deified goddess. That goddamned Cupid, you know? Year passed on to year, and way passed on to way. And as 40 began to creep up toward me like a panther ready to pounce, 35-year-old me chose to do what any rational man in my position would. No, I did not find a girl 10 years younger than me, far too pretty for me and far too dumb for me to fall in love with. Unfortunately, the decade younger troop doesn't go for my new brand of mediocrity. At an age, it's just not palatable. Rather, while walking home in a fine mist of rain on a Tuesday afternoon, I let the errant thought cross my mind that I would do anything to get out of my current situation. The thought was just that. It was uttered only in my subconscious, maybe my conscious mind, but it resounded into the firmament and the very core of the world alike. In less time than a blink or a breath, a sharp-looking man, olive-skinned, about 6'4", 6'5", skinny but clearly well-muscled with a thick mane of gray and black hair and a matching well-groomed gray and black beard, was right in front of me. From nowhere. Wearing what seemed to be a $3,000 suit and some equally expensive shoes, watch, and sunglasses, he broke his model pretty but respectably masculine face with the widest smile I'd seen outside of a toothpaste commercial. I wish I could recall precisely what Mephistopheles said to me, but I cannot. It wasn't anything exciting or world-shaking. He essentially asked me if I wanted a new job and a new life. I said yes. He asked me if I knew who he was. I said yes. He asked me if I was still okay with making the deal and mentioned that desperate people do dumb things far too often. I said yes, and that I was certainly desperate and probably pretty dumb to boot. He laughed at that, said he liked me. We shook hands. He brought out a necklace that had a chain of deep gunmetal silver and a dangling token to hang near my chest of what appeared to be lightless black onyx.
Brimstone,
he smirked, as my questioning eyes looked up at him. He put the necklace over my head, pulling my shirt forward to allow the jewelry to fall underneath and touch my skin. With that, he gave me a wink and walked on down the street. Life got rather interesting after that. Promotions, big moves, renewed accolades, raises, praises, heaps of honors and recognition, women, wine, weed, whiskey. The world bowed to me once again. And, once again, I knew I was undeserving of it, but I lapped it up anyway. The Federalist fun only lasted about 3 months, though. Often I would think of leaving my amazing job, moving somewhere new, deflecting those accolades, walking away from the money, ignoring the praise, not accepting any honors or recognition, going completely off women, wine, weed, and whiskey. But every time those thoughts of refinding myself and redefining myself and redirecting myself came around, the little chunk of brimstone against my chest would feel like it was burrowing a spike deep into me. Fire and searing molten rock would be injected into my veins, and my moments of excruciating hell would make me reconsider those thoughts that were flitting about just seconds before. Oh, I tried to take the necklace off, but the level of punishment for that was even worse than when I thought of trying to change my stars again. The first time I tried to take the totem off, I woke up 2 days later, having blacked out from the pain. My skin was singed, as was my hair, and my breathing was ragged for another month after that. I had no doubt that if I were successful in taking the necklace off, doing so would end me. And that was terrifying now that I knew that devils and demons and deep pits of hell were real. So, whereas I thought I was imprisoned by my mediocrity and the general boredom and ennui of a normal life, I now realize the grave error of my mistake. Each day is more painful than the last. Even when I don't have the thoughts of freeing myself from the now Sisyphean new life Mephistopheles made for me, I can still feel what I can only describe as a tiny little tentacle working and worming its way ever deeper into me, wriggling through my veins and sinew and strengthening its hold on my body and soul. I am not my own man anymore, and I do not know what to do. Just as there was no lead up to my tale of a devil's bargain, there is no lesson learned or flashy ending to it. I am still just about as mediocre as they come, so any retelling of the events will end in the realm of the necessarily mediocre too. I look around my lonely life of naught but work and pain and a knowledge that the afterlife does exist and that horrors assuredly await me there, and I can't help but wonder why I did all this. Why I am suffering all this? And for what? As with all stories involving the rogue, my tale of Mephistopheles ends abruptly and with no tangible meaning or moral. Only imprisonment, disillusionment, a bitter taste, and some sadness. Thank you for listening to All This and For What, an original short story by me, Jared I. McGee. All music and sound effects that you have heard throughout episode 101 come from YouTube's royalty-free audio library and freesound.org. Everything is being used under CC 0 1.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication licenses. That goes for all except for this last track, which is I Am a Man Who Will Fight for Your Honor by Chris Zabriskie. It is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution License, International CC 0 BY 4.0. Please head over to chriszabriskie.com to find more of his music. That's CHRISZABRISKIE.com. That does it for Prose this week. Our next episode will come in 2 weeks' time. Please do consider sharing the podcast with someone that you think might enjoy it because it helps so very much. As you continue about your day and this rather mad time in our world, I really hope that you'll remember to love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is always stranger than fiction, even when viewed from a distance. Thanks for listening.